Same.
Presentation morning. Stressed beyond belief.
Not stressed.
Yeah, I know.
More like exhaustion.
I just want to get this over with.
Randy, Steph, run, run away, do it.
You guys stressed?
Dressed or stressed?
Stressed.
And stressed. Yes, but we're also dressed.
Good.
What a
Good.
terrible way to start a presentation.
Great. Well, welcome back to our next presentation on the transportation segment. I have to wait for JD to stop talking. Oh, and he's pointing at Doug. Tries to throw Doug under the bus. Not a chance. JD, I know. I can hear your voice, your dulcet tones from here. All right. All right, would you please welcome Adam Baker, and he's going to be doing a reimagination of Cunningham cars.
Thanks everybody. My name is Adam Baker, and I love cars. If you couldn't tell by this picture, that's actually a pretty ugly car, but it was my first Hot Wheels. So it just kind of inspired me, and I felt like I should put it up there to kind of tell you a little bit about myself. The car kind of describes how I got to where I am, and it also describes why I drive what I drive, which if you saw that car, it's outside, it's a 1986 Camaro, and it just is a part of my passion for cars embodied. So you know that about me now, that I love cars, and I'm also from Rochester, New York. That's a really big part of my past. I've grown up there my entire life, and it's a city in upstate New York. It's the third largest city in New York, and it's an hour and a half between Buffalo and Syracuse. Rochester has a very storied, innovative past, including companies like Kodak, Xerox, and Bausch & Lomb included. Kodak obviously very innovative in the photography world. Xerox very innovative in office scanning machines and machines of that sort. Bausch & Lomb is a lens manufacturer, so they actually manufacture contacts, glasses, as well as like microscope lenses and things like that. So very technical things, but also very innovative for their time. Also, Rochester has a very storied automotive past. Most people wouldn't know this, but Rochester almost became Detroit. It's kind of a weird thing to say, but the first patent for the automobile in the 1880s came from Rochesterian George Selden. It was the first patent, and he actually had royalties that you could get on any vehicle produced from the 1880s to the early 1900s. You could get a 5% royalty on every single vehicle that was produced between that time period. Rochester also produced carburetors, the Rochester Quadrajet carburetor, which would be present on cars from GM from the 1970s to the 1980s, and even later on some cars. So there's a big connection there with the automotive world and my city that I call home. So it only seemed logical that I combined the two into a capstone project. And I was sitting in the dentist's office reading through the Rochester magazine, and I stumbled upon an article about this car company called Cunningham Cars. And it was really interesting. I had never heard anything about it other than the factory that existed in the city. And the factory was recently redone. That's all I had ever heard about the company. But this article, it was only a page long, it really sparked my interest. And so I decided to do my capstone as a reimagination of this historic car brand, Cunningham Cars. So I did a lot of research on the company. It was very important to look at the history, obviously, in developing a modern concept car based on the brand. So I looked through about 150 years of history, including history of the city as well as just the automotive industry in general. I did some research on luxury as well, and then I'm also going to tell you guys about my process, how I got to the final product as well. So we're starting with history. It all starts with James Cunningham, who was an Irish-born man. He immigrated to Canada at a young age. He was born in 1815. Immigrated over to Canada at a very very young age, and lived in Coburg, Ontario, on a farm. His family wasn't like traditionally farmers, so he ended up actually developing a skill for woodworking and craftsmanship, and his family wasn't too distressed that he ended up leaving. He traveled to New York City in 1833 at 18 years old to visit his uncle, who was an architect at the time, and he was looking for an apprenticeship with his uncle. That didn't work out, and on his way back, he passed through Rochester and saw this city that was starting to boom. There's only 10,000 people at the time in 1833. So he passed through, he went back home, stayed there for the rest of the year, and in 1834, in the summer, he returned to Rochester, and he joined a coach building company there as an apprentice at 19 years old. And this is where things really start to take off in the history of Cunningham. In 1837, there's this panic of 1837, which caused really widespread financial distress in the United States. But because of that, the employers who Cunningham was working with ended up resigning. They wanted out. They were too worried about what could possibly happen with their money. And Cunningham and two co-workers ended up buying out their employers and manufactured their own carriages, which were just small buggies at the time, lightweight to travel short distances. In 1839, those effects from the panic of 1837 begin to be felt. And then things start to take a turn here, and Cunningham assumes $6,000 in debt and full ownership of the carriage company when his two co-owners resigned. So $6,000 in 1842 is $170,000 in today's money. He's 27 years old and very optimistic that his craftsmanship and hard work can pay back his loans. The loan interest rate at the time, though, was 18%, so he really needed to be sure that he could do it. About a decade later, the Cunningham factory is destroyed by a fire, so things get worse. Cunningham takes out a large loan to pay for the new building, so you can still see he has some confidence that he can make this work, but he could just be digging himself into a deep hole. He didn't know for sure. The factory is still in Rochester. That's the old photo of it, and then it's been updated to modern apartments. They're beautiful. They have a Cunningham carriage in the entryway. About a decade after that, the financial collapse of 1857 caused James Cunningham to declare bankruptcy. So the U.S. had some really serious financial troubles. They were having crises every 20 years. So you think it's bad now, it was pretty bad then. In 1868, after a decade of kind of struggling to regain financial stability, Cunningham becomes partners with his son, Joseph, and Rufus Breyer, who was the son of the mayor, and now Cunningham's son-in-law. He was a financial whiz, and they were able to achieve really strong financial stability. In 1873, there was another financial crisis. Cunningham's financial stability, though, gained by Rufus Breyer, allowed them to escape that panic unscathed. In 1882, the first strike in the history of the company occurred, lasted 2 months, and it ended up working out better for the workers in the end. They got higher wages and more lenient regulations. In 1886, James Cunningham passed away. He worked in the factory every day with his hands, building parts for his carriages until the day he died. And one of the employees underneath him described him as a working man. He knew the wants of working men and appreciated the difficulties and hardships to which they were exposed. He came to be looked upon, especially by those in his employ, as a kind and loving father, and they felt he was their friend. And they could ask help him as of a brother. They regarded his death as a personal grief. So obviously he cared so much about what he did. He cared about the people he worked with and the relationships he built. And it was just cool to see that in my research, how someone, an employee underneath him, who in other industries or maybe in Detroit at the time could have been treated very poorly, was treated extremely well. And in 1893, after a couple decades of rising success, Cunningham presented their line of products to the Chicago World's Fair, and they won 2 awards for highest quality. I've got a couple of press releases here. I prepared this at the time. This is actually a hearse, lightweight hearse. And then also a Landau carriage. So this has 5 panels of glass, which makes it a Landau. And then in 1900, Cunningham entered the new era of the automotive industry. They produced the first electric runabout to transport goods around their facility. And this ended up leading to full automobile production. The first cars that they ever produced were $3,500, which is the equivalent of $90,000 today. So, very high-end vehicle for the time. They would build the chassis and the bodies fully in-house, but then they would source the engines and other parts from outside the company. In 1910, Cunningham began producing everything in-house. So they would build their own engines, transmissions, suspension, and steering components fully in-house. Now they start to take off in the automotive industry. At this point, they were considered the premier luxury brand in the United States and even throughout the world, comparable to Rolls-Royce vehicles at the time. They introduced their first V8 in 1916, which is America's largest. It was also the second V8 in an American car, right behind Cadillac. But this was the largest and most powerful, rated at 90 horsepower. Doesn't seem like a lot, but for the time it was almost twice what the average vehicle had. And there you can see a picture of it, just in the 1919 Speedster. In 1919, renowned driver Ralph De Palma sets an American speed record driving a Cunningham Roadster. His speed was an average of 98 miles an hour over 10 miles on a wooden racetrack in Brooklyn. And also at the time, the road quality was not excellent. The average car could do about 40 miles an hour, and you wouldn't even want to go that fast on the roads that they had. The speed limit was 20, and it didn't get raised to 30 until the 1930s. This is Ralph De Palma in the Speedster. This is just a stripped down version of a stock vehicle that set the record for fastest stock vehicle. And then I have a short clip describing the road quality at the time. And then the image there shows you what you're dealing with. 98 miles an hour is pretty fast in something like that. That same year was Cunningham's peak year. They produced over 700 vehicles worth over $3.2 million in that day. And some cars would sell for $15,000 a piece, which is the equivalent today of about $180,000. So your average Lamborghini. 1929 was a decade later. Cunningham was really successful for that 10 years. Still considered one of the premier luxury brands in America. The great stock market crash in 1929, which caused the Depression, really hit them hard. In 1931, they were unable to adapt to the changing economy and trends, and ceased to produce their own cars. They would instead make bodies for companies like Ford and Buick, and just build it on their chassis. Here's a 1936 Ford, which Cunningham built the body for. The car would have been a $600 car originally, but Cunningham's work added $2,000, so it quadrupled the price. In 1936, Cunningham, after those years of producing bodies, abandoned all automotive production. The Depression really hit them hard. In 1937, they started searching for other things that they could do. They began defense production, producing tanks and other military spec parts. And here's an example of a heavy artillery vehicle that they produced. There are only a handful of these, and you can't find any living examples. So, after World War II, they sought out more products to produce, including lawn and garden equipment, so little tillers and lawnmowers, but that didn't end up working out. In 1951, Rochesterian Andrew Vincent developed an improved telephone crossbar switch, which is kind of a basic mechanism that connects a caller to the end recipient of a phone call instead of an operator doing anything. It would do it about that. So Cunningham began producing these, and they were the leader in this industry for a while. 1968, though, less than 2 decades later, technology advanced, and the crossbar switch became outdated. Cunningham was sold to Rochester automotive machine tool manufacturer Lewis & Works. And then in 1977, they abandoned all of Cunningham's operations. So there was an interesting platform for me to base my project on. There was a long history, the first half of their history was very, very interesting. There was a real struggle to overcome, and they overcame it, and they dominated the industry for almost a decade. I talked with Jay Leno on the phone, who is one of the notorious owners of a Cunningham car, and he describes it as, the pinnacle of luxury at the time. It is a car that would be bought by people like the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts with old money from those industries, the oil industries and such. And so he said that the conditions that the car was built in could never be recreated because materials were expensive and labor was cheap. Now it's the other way around. And it gave me an interesting context to kind of understand when the car was built and how I could adapt it to today's market. So some important factors that I took out of the first half of Cunningham's history when they were really on the rise. Every single car from 1910 to 1931 was built by hand, 100% in-house. So they were the top end of the luxury market, built by hand. Secondly, they were very reliable. The cars had massive radiators, which meant they never overheated. And they also had people come out and service the vehicles instead of sending you to a mechanic. So that was an interesting thing. They really put a lot into their service of the vehicles. Also, they were very innovative with their 442 cubic inch V8, the largest of the time and the most powerful. They were one of the first companies to do certain styling cues, which I can talk about later. But they were also very conservative with their style. They didn't change the designs of their vehicles from 1920 to 1929. So things got outdated quickly for them, and that's part of why they failed in the end. So my next part of the project, I looked at luxury because I needed to find an area of the market where it would fit, and obviously high-end luxury was that segment of the market. So I needed to understand what is luxury. And so I looked in the dictionary, and it says a condition or situation of great comfort, ease, and wealth. So the car that I was going to be designing needed to be comfortable, easy to use, and simple, as well as showing wealth and status. So it needed to exude this presence of status. And underneath luxury, there's certain subcategories, and one of the categories is mass luxury. So a mass luxury vehicle today would be something like a Lexus, where it's a luxury vehicle, but it's still relatively affordable to an upper class or middle class income. But there's another category called meta luxury, which would be something more like a Bugatti, your $1 million cars or $10 million cars or something like that, or even like an iPhone that's got a case that's $1 million, something like that. There is a case actually where a fashion designer, he made it. It's white gold and diamonds, black diamonds. It's $19 million for an iPhone case. So that's what I'm talking about, the meta luxury, and that's kind of the market that this car would have to enter. Another interesting statement I saw on luxury items is that they are recognized faster and evoke more extreme emotions. So if you can establish yourself in the luxury market, your products get noticed, either negatively or positively, but they will get noticed and there will be a reaction to them. So it was just kind of an interesting thing to hear and consider when I was developing the model. Another thing I looked at was the luxury car segment as it relates to the whole automotive industry. The automotive market is growing at a rate of 36% per year. But within that, the luxury car segment is growing at 154% per year. So that's a massive difference. The luxury car segment being cars that are like $80,000 and up. So that was encouraging, and it showed that there could be new brands inserted into that segment. Within that segment, I looked at competitors such as Rolls-Royce, Maybach, and Bugatti, just to compare kind of what they're doing and how they're innovating. So to begin the process, I started with the inspiration, so looking at other cars and other things around me, and ideating and creating empathy sketches based on those. After that, I moved into a small sketch model, which helped me understand the form, which I then refined with more sketches. So my inspiration, obviously, I wanted to draw from Cunningham's past. There's the 1923 Cunningham Speedster, which I think is a beautiful car for the time. I'm not a big fan of that era of automotive design. I do appreciate the history of how we got there and how we move forward from it. But most of the cars look the same. This car has some certain details about it that make it stand out from that era of automobiles. So some of the details that I really noticed were the grille shape on the bottom. It was kind of unique how it cut in like that. A lot of them were square or didn't have a detail that was so subtle but still so different. Also, floating lights are pretty common for the time, but they had the largest lights of basically any car you could buy. Also, there's a cutback that connects the main form to the fender there. You can kind of see it as it rises up and connects to the sharp edge on the fender. And that was an interesting shape because most cars don't do that from that era. This is my favorite view of the Speedster, and the boat tail rear was a new feature at that time for most cars. They were probably one of the first few brands to have something like that on a model. And also the sharp fenders are unique for the time. Most of them are flat. And so that really piqued my interest, and it was something I wanted to consider moving into ideation. So this is just a good side view to show kind of the platform I was working with and just give me a good idea of maybe how I wanted to create the stance on the concept. This is a picture showing it in the 1940s. It's kind of how it looked in that era. And then, oops. So this is a promotional picture that would have been in one of their brochures, and it shows the human scale compared to the car. So it's a very big car. It doesn't necessarily look like it when it stands alone, but with someone in it, you can see it's very large, especially the steering wheel. Some other features that were important from that, the headlights use Bausch & Lomb lenses, and like I mentioned, Bausch & Lomb is a lens manufacturer from Rochester, and so it would be interesting to maybe carry a Bausch & Lomb feature into the modern car. And also, you could get 2 or 3 seats in that. You could get a pop-up rear seat in the boat tail to add an additional seat, and also they were hand-formed aluminum bodies, so that was a pretty cool feature as well. Some other cars I looked at are the Spyker C8, which is they're a Dutch company, and they have a similar story to Cunningham. They were a very storied racing company in the 1910s and 1920s. They went out of business around the same time as Cunningham. But this car was reintroduced in 2000 by Fashion World mogul, and it's a very powerful supercar, and it has an incredibly high-end luxury interior. I also looked at the 1938 Bugatti, which is a pretty cool car. The Bugatti Type 35, which would have been around the same time as that Speedster. The GM Firebird concept. The YF-22 Raptor. So I looked at aircraft as well. That was something really inspirational. Also looking at like the SR-71 Blackbird, and then also watercraft as well, because the car had kind of an aquatic feel with that boat tail. I wanted to relate to it in some way. And catamarans have these 2 runners on the side, which are pretty interesting and unique. And I thought I could maybe institute that in the ideation phase. So moving on to ideation, I had to start with the logo. I wanted to do a little bit of branding, better understand and place the product in the market. Cunningham had this brochure that I actually went and saw at the Henry Ford Benson Research Center up in Detroit. I went up there, and then we got these scanned. I translated this to a hand-sketched version of it, and then I created a vector from it. So I rectified any inconsistencies between the letters and just kind of updated it slightly. But I wanted to keep that antique feel. Also, this is their badge from the time. It's not a great badge, but I wanted to translate it to a modern car in some way. So I talked about that cutback in the grille, and that was a really interesting feature that I liked, and it's actually in the badge there. You can kind of see it where it says car. That's the bottom of the grille in the badge, and I wanted to translate that into a logo that referenced Cunningham cars, but also communicated that vintage badge. And then I moved into ideating the form of the car. So the old car is a mid-centered cockpit. I looked at forward, rearward, and center cabin cars just to see what would translate the best into a modern market version of the old Speedster. And then I kind of went crazy, did anything I wanted to. Like, I mean, some of those are, it's like a spaceship. There's an airplane on there. I think that was JD. And then you can kind of see the reference here from the old form, how it's got that center form and then the fenders that extend off the sides. And I liked that idea, and I wanted to kind of continue on with that, but I still explored more traditional forms, more of a supercar form, and then also like a futuristic form with a fin on it. I looked at some front elevations to kind of understand how I could translate the grille shape and lights from the old car into a new car. So did a few of these. I have a whole stack of these downstairs, so this is just a small sample of the work that I did for this. And then continued looking. I looked at more round forms, and started looking at different angles of the car and how it could look in perspective. And I started to get an idea of what I wanted. I like these rear wheels covered and set out from the main body and still connected. And then the front fenders would be sharp and raised up. So you can kind of see that here. It's got a boat tail that can extend out. And the stabilizer was yes or no for me at one point, and I decided to put it, cut it out. And that's mainly because I wanted to keep it more simple. And the fin just distracted from that. So I'll show you some of my later renderings, how that developed. And then I went into a sketch model like I described. This just helped me understand the form and basically what not to do. I didn't really like it at all, but it did tell me a bit about the form and how it was rendered, and also how I could change the rear of it. So I moved back into refining that, with more sketches. This is a lot closer to the final form that I decided on. And these are just variations of that. This one is what I decided to start rendering when I went to the digital phase. So I'll show you that. This is an early digital side elevation with that sharp fender on the front and then the rounded rear and over tail. And then it was also kind of a learning curve I had to overcome because I hadn't done a lot of